Hi there, I'm Celeste and I'm the board president for ToolBox Project, and welcome to our first virtual Fix-It Fair in collaboration with the City of Eugene. Thank you very much, Eugene. And I'm here to talk about how to repair and renew your clothing. And so the first things I want to talk about are some things that you can do without a sewing machine, without a lot of sewing experience. Even if you don't have a sewing machine, I know you've got clothing and your clothing wears out. And so I'm going to show you some really simple things you can do that have really helped me out a lot, some tricks that I've learned in a lifetime of sewing for myself and professionally. And so let's get started. Thanks again for supporting ToolBox Project and our virtual Fix-It Fair. We're here in my home workshop, and I have a suit jacket here. And, you know, these get kind of worn over time, and this has done just that. And so I did a little bit of lint rolling. I could do a little bit more of that. But another thing I want to show you that's different from a lint roller is this defuzzer. And you know how, especially maybe underarms and in some places you can get those kind of fuzz balls on material over time? Well, you just brush it with this. Just kind of like brushing your dog. And it takes off a lot of those fuzz balls, or pills as they're called. Now another trick is, if you have one of these, you don't like it because it snags your clothes, here's what I did. I just used a hot glue gun and put a little hot glue on the corners, and that seems to be helping. But snags do happen a lot, and a lot of people think that's the end of their clothing, or there's nothing you can do about it, or they'll just cut the snag off, and in that case, that could eventually grow into a hole in the fabric. So I want to show you this really cool tool, and it's called a snag nabbit, which is also really fun to say when you snag your clothes. Snag nabbit. So how this works is it's kind of like a needle, and it's got a sharp pointy end, and then this textured, grooved end. And so I'm going to poke the pointy end right where the snag is coming out, and then this textured part, and I kind of like to twist it a little bit as I pull it through. That textured part grabs onto the snag and just pulls it to the inside of the garment. It's gone. Beautiful. It's okay if you don't have a snag nabbit. You can use a needle and thread, and the thread may grab onto the snag just like this textured end of the snag nabbit does. So cool. Now, another one of my favorite ways to customize things or to repair things that break a lot are to replace buttons or fix buttons. And so this button, it's not broken, but you know, it could be more interesting. So I'm just going to replace it with one of this cool, it's actually made of stone, hand-carved stone button. I'm not sure what kind of stone this is, but it's beautiful. So here's another tool, a seam ripper. You could just use the scissors. I really think they should call it a seam knot ripper. Hopefully it rips the seam but not the fabric. And so I'm just gonna break the threads, this button, pull the threads out. All you're gonna need for this, besides that, is a needle and thread. You could get one of these really inexpensive, easy to find sewing kits that have needles already threaded, so you don't even have to do the threading part. They usually come with a couple of buttons for a cuff, a sleeve cuff or something. And you can even get these free at a hotel front desk when you're traveling. And here's how needles often come in the shop. I like this because you can just dial this opening to the size needle you want, dump it out, I'm using a heavy duty thread. It's a little thicker than average. And I pull a length of thread that is just, enough to handle. So you don't have to pull it back too far. And it's going to be double. You're going to fold it over in half. So I'm just going to get the thread into the needle, pull it till both ends are even. Here's where I get to show you another cool trick that I love, that my mother taught me when I was learning to sew. Tying a knot in the thread. There's an easy way to do this. Excuse me while I lick my finger that I have washed, and I loop this thread around the tip of my finger, and then I use my thumb to just roll the thread off my fingertip, and that twists the thread. Grab it with my fingernail, and I just pull that knot down to the end. Have a nice sturdy knot there. I love that. So I'm going to go from the front, right where the old button was, and just take a stitch. Now, if you're doing this and you find that your thread tangles up a lot, that often happens with thinner thread, I'm going to show you another tool that I love, that my mother also taught me about, and it's this Beeswax thread waxer. It's got these grooves in it, so you can just pull the thread through this piece of beeswax. Now, I'm just going through the button, and here comes another trick. Once this button is sewn on, I want it to have a little space behind it so that this buttonhole side fits nicely behind the button when it's buttoned. And so while I'm sewing the button on, I'm going to put this pin on top in between the two holes so that there will be a little space between the stitches. Just take another stitch. And just before I pull it tight, get that pin in there. Okay, I'm going to go in one hole, out the other, a couple of times. And instead of turning the fabric over, I'm just going through it with a stitch like that, pull it tight. I'll do one more. This is heavy duty thread, so I really only need to do this a couple of times, but if you have thinner thread, you might do 3 or 4. You be the judge till it feels strong enough. Now, come back out, so my thread's coming out in between the jacket and the button. I pull this pin out, but I'm going to wrap this thread around the stitches behind the button, and that's going to make what is called a button shank. Go one more time. That thread, length to it, I'm sewing through that group of stitches. And just before I pull it tight, this is how I tie a knot so that this stitching doesn't come out. Send my needle through that loop, and then I like to be extra safe and then go again through this new loop, almost like crocheting. Pull it tight. Then I just snip it. Test it, button it. When you pick your new button, make sure it's one that fits through the buttonhole. It's like the same size as the old button. That's very important. So the next thing I'm going to do is talk about sewing machines.